Quote, love, unquote, by New Amsterdam. Chapter 7. Kirishima-san! Everyone! Yayozuru is standing at the door to greet them, her dark hair and long dress blown back by the sea breeze. She waves. I'm so glad you made it. Welcome. With a groan, the 4 members of Riot topple out of the car and onto the pathway in front of Yayozuru's summer home. A few days ago, booking a 2-day vacation to a remote seaside town had seemed like a great idea. But after playing a show last night and waking up before sunrise this morning to drive out, they're having second thoughts. I hope your drive was alright, Yayozuru is saying, coming towards them. It's only mid-afternoon, but she's styled to perfection. Her hair is turquoise and peach and white, the loose fabric conveying class and comfort all at once. Jiro is the first to recover herself. After stifling a yawn, she rubs a hand over her face. Yeah, it was great. Totally great. She stands up a bit straighter, smoothing down her hair and trying to appear less than dead on her feet. Ashido and Kaminari nod in time. Thanks for the invite, Ashido says. And for sending the car. It's too much, you know. Yayozuru waves them all off. Nonsense. The house is just sitting here otherwise. And there's room for everyone. Now come in. I've had breakfast laid out for all of you, and everyone else is inside. The omelette bar should take a moment to warm up, but we'll get you started with tea or coffee. She turns around to lead them inside, but the others linger for a moment before they follow her. The house looms in front of them, a massive structure that sits on the edge of the beach and casts a long shadow across the entire landscape. I feel like I just got slapped in the face with how rich she is, Kaminari mutters ruefully. She's so cute about it, though. Ashido shakes her head. They go after Yayozuru, leaving Jiro on the curb with Kirishima. Just before they, too, follow the others inside, Kirishima hears Jiro mumbling under her breath. Some people really are just completely different from the rest of us, aren't they? There's not much time to linger on Jiro's words. Inside the house, a veritable feast of breakfast food has been laid out for them. Yayozuru is motioning towards different options. Rice and fresh fish, a juice bar, fresh waffles and pastries. Ashido and Kaminari grab plates and start loading them, smiling at Yaoyozuru's enthusiasm. Kirishima piles his own plate with breakfast sausages, and then pulls out a chair at the long table. The kitchen opens out onto a deck, the glass doors pulled open so that the breeze and sunshine are let into the room. Soon enough, the others join him, and for a moment the 5 of them enjoy a companionable meal. And then, if you would just listen, I'm sure you'd see the sense in my position, a loud, authoritative voice says. It would be in your best interests, in addition to benefiting the careers of your peers. How many times do I have to tell you to get lost? Kirishima knows that voice well enough now to expect it when Bakugo comes stomping into the kitchen. He's dressed for the beach in black and red swim trunks, and a familiar pair of expensive sunglasses hanging from the neck of his tank top. He's looking over his shoulder, incensed, but as soon as he turns around, he stops short. For a moment, he just stands in the doorway, staring at Kirishima. Then, Sero and another dark-haired man crash into Bakugo, all 3 of them tumbling forward. Ashido throws her head back and laughs as the 3 men get back to their feet. It's Sero who recovers first, and he helps to detangle Bakugo and their other companion. Thank you, Sero-kun, the man says, straightening his thin-framed glasses. He's tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a track jacket over his beach attire. Kirishima doesn't recognize him, though he feels like he should. Both of you get away from me, Bakugo grounds out, sidestepping them and pulling out a chair next to Kirishima. He turns the chair around and sits in it backwards, reaching out to grab a piece of meat from Kirishima's plate. Hello to you too, babe, Kirishima says, rolling his eyes. You know, there's a whole spread of food, like, right there, right? The man in the glasses clears his throat. Bakugo-kun, aren't you going to introduce us? Bakugo looks back at him with a look of disgust. No? Kirishima elbows him in the side and then turns to the newcomer. I'm Kirishima. Nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you, the man says, extending a hand for Kirishima to shake. I'm Ida Tenya. I'm an agent with Ingenium talent, which you may have heard of. We've been very interested in you all, Kirishima-kun. Your band's rise has been nothing short of meteoric, and I have to ask you about who's managing. He shows no signs of slowing down until Yaoyorozu gets to her feet and says, Ida-san, didn't we decide there'd be no work talk this weekend? Ida steps back, abashed. Of course, I didn't mean. It wasn't his fault, Sero puts in. I got him started, asking him to talk to Bakugo. We'll lay off now, Yaoyorozu. Promise. Talk to you about what? Kirishima asks Bakugo. Some bullshit, Bakugo mutters, and then he reaches out and grains Kirishima's glass of orange juice. Kirishima raises a brow. You don't have to be a brat, he says casually. Besides, you shouldn't be grumpy anymore. Look, I'm here now. He means it as a joke. He doesn't really expect that Bakugo will be happier with him around, or that he was waiting for Kirishima to arrive. Honestly, he's found that the only way he can really play at being Bakugo's boyfriend is if he turns all of it, the affection and familiarity, into a joke with himself. But then Bakugo surprises him. He scoffs. Yeah, only after sticking me with these losers for a day. Kirishima grins despite himself. Sorry? Ida-kun, have you seen... Again from the hallway, Kirishima hears a voice before he sees who it belongs to. But before he has a chance to recognize the person, they let out a gasp and run towards him. Kirishima-kun, you made it! Uraraka is standing in front of him, grabbing both of his hands and smiling widely. I'm so glad you're here, she says, before she spots Bakugo and suddenly turns indignant. Is that why you just ran away? You were coming to meet Kirishima-kun? Bakugo leans forward in his chair, staring Uraraka down. So what? You're impossible, she tells him. She turns to Kirishima. He's impossible. Kirishima nods sagely. Believe me, I know. The kitchen is open enough to not feel crowded, even as the newcomers grab their own plates of food and pull up chairs around the table. They go through introductions, and it's only Bakugo who holds himself back from the laughter and conversation. He's not doing much of anything until the last members of the group arrive. Todoroki and Midoriya come into the kitchen together. They're talking in low voices, but stop when they realize how many people have gathered there. Kaminari, Jiro, and Yaoyorozu are talking on one side of the table, Ashido and Uraraka between them, and then Bakugo and Kirishima. Ida and Sero complete the circle, with Sero across from Ashido and next to Kaminari. Everyone's here, Midoriya says, smiling brightly. It's good to see you again, Kirishima-kun. Kirishima has never been able to quite label the nature of Midoriya's appeal. He doesn't have Bakugo's fierce good looks, or Todoroki's sculpted beauty, but there's something so warm and open about his face, a kindness and sincerity that radiates through everything he does. The world had fallen in love with Midoriya Izuku through UA and his character Daiki, and now, being in the same room as him, it's impossible not to see why. He's a person who lights up a room with his very presence. Midoriya's gaze drifts from Bakugo and Kirishima, his brow furrowing slightly as he takes in the sight of Bakugo, leaning across Kirishima to steal food off his plate. Dude, Kaminari says, looking up. We watched your entire show in 4 days. It was amazing. Midoriya's cheeks turn a bit pink, but he and Todoroki go over to sit with Kaminari on his side of the table. Before they can get settled, Bakugo kicks his chair back from the table with an audible slide across the wood-paneled floor. He gets to his feet without looking at anyone, and then stomps back out of the kitchen. Midoriya watches him leave, the smile frozen on his face. Uraraka frowns after Bakugo. Honestly, she mutters, I wanted them to talk this out before everyone got here. Kirishima doesn't ask her to clarify. Instead, he gets up and follows Bakugo out of the kitchen, waving his apologies at the rest of the group. It doesn't take long to find him. The house is wide and open. The rooms blend into each other, many of them connected with just doorways. Bakugo is in a sitting room, standing up and staring out at the ocean through the massive glass panels. Kirishima steps up beside him. If they were in public, maybe he'd feel comfortable touching Bakugo, resting his hand on Bakugo's shoulder or his hip, grabbing his hands. But without any eyes on them, Kirishima doesn't have the excuse to do any of those things. Hey, he says, when Bakugo doesn't acknowledge his presence for a moment. Is this okay? I know I asked you to come, but if you really can't stand it, you should have told me. It's fine, Bakugo grits out. His hands are clenched at his sides. Kirishima doesn't believe him. From what Uraraka had told him, from what Bakugo himself had said, Kirishima figured that this outing would be good for him, that he'd have a chance to be among his not friends again, in a relaxed way, and that they'd maybe be able to mend some broken fences. But Bakugo doesn't even want to try. I don't want you to be miserable for the next 2 days, Kirishima says, brow furrowing. He's gonna figure it out, Bakugo spits out. What? Deku, Bakugo hisses, his voice going low. He's such a fucking... He notices everything. He can't know that we're in a bullshit relationship. Bakugo's facial expression barely changes, but the crease between his brows deepens. He's genuinely concerned about this. Why? I mean, Ashido and the others know, so it would ruin everything, Bakugo says, his voice so fierce and insistent, and Kirishima immediately believes him. Bakugo wouldn't care this much if Midoriya didn't represent an actual threat to what Bakugo is trying to do. Okay, Kirishima says. It's fine, we've practiced. No one's gonna figure it out. Everyone thinks we're dating. It's fine. Bakugo opens his mouth to respond, but then freezes when they both hear footsteps just outside the room. Fuck, Bakugo growls. Then he grabs Kirishima by the neck of his shirt and pulls him forward, covering his mouth in a wet, sloppy kiss. It's been a few days since they were together last, but Kirishima remembers how to respond to these kisses. For a moment, he just shuts his eyes and lets himself lean into it. Bakugo reaches up a hand and tugs on Kirishima's ponytail, cutting his fingers through Kirishima's loose hair. Bakugo-kun, Kirishima-kun... Uraraka's voice is lost in a squeak as she enters the room. Sorry to interrupt. The last words come all out in a rush, and Kirishima feels Bakugo's lips pull into a smile against his, just before he lets Kirishima go. Kirishima sucks in a breath, smoothing out his hair, and trying to not look disappointed that the kiss is over. What the fuck are you doing, walking in on us? Bakugo growls, honestly sounding indignant. I didn't mean to, Uraraka says, waving her hands in front of her. Besides, you could have found a room with a door. You were looking for us? Kirishima asks. He smiles, but it feels strained. That was one way to keep their cover, he supposes. But a little warning would have been nice. We're going down to the beach, Uraraka says, voice returning to a normal pang even though her face is still red. And I don't care how in love you guys are, Bakugo-kun isn't allowed to keep you all to himself. She grabs Kirishima by the arm and tugs him forward, Bakugo rolling his eyes even as he falls in step with them. Uraraka's chatter carries them through the house to the others. but the entire time Kirishima is distracted. Whatever Bakugo wants from this weekend, from him in general, Kirishima can deal with. As long as he gets to be close to Bakugo, he's willing to play along. It takes a few minutes to gather everyone up to head down to the beach. Yaoyorozu takes the lead, walking with Jiro and Ashido, and pointing out the various points on the horizon to them. Bakugo walks more or less with Todoroki, and Midoriya and Ida bring up the rear of the group with Sero and Kaminari. Kirishima and Uraraka end up in the middle of the crowd. It's a private beach, Uraraka explains. Honestly, I'd never been to one before Momo-chan started inviting us here. I was in Hawaii last week with my parents, and we went to a public resort. I sometimes like that better, but at home it's impossible. One of us alone would have been recognized, so all of us together is basically impossible. Kirishima winces sympathetically. I only end up in the tabloids when I'm with Bakugo, but even that's a bit weird. Uraraka hooks her thumbs into the pockets of her jean shorts. Her pink swimsuit leaves her shoulders bare, and she's tied up her hair so that the dotting of freckles across her shoulders and the back of her neck is visible. I've seen those pictures, you know. She smiles slyly at him, and Kirishima shifts with embarrassment. He'd mentioned the tabloids without thinking, and he knows Uraraka doesn't mind his relationship with Bakugo, but it's still so awkward. She played his love interest for 5 years, and they'd been thought of as a real-life couple for longer than that. Surely, if anyone was going to discover their secret, it'd be her. I still feel like I should apologize, Kirishima says. I mean, I didn't mean for it all to come out without warning to you. That day at Hagakuro's party, you must think I was trying to fool you or something. Uraraka waves her hands, flustered. Of course not. To be honest, it happened almost at a perfect time. I take my parents to Hawaii every year at the same time. I didn't wake up to a media ambush or something. Ida-kun handled the press while I was out of the country, and I didn't have to deal with it at all. Kirishima feels a bit better about that. He hasn't been ambushed by the media himself, but he imagines that's because Bakugo's the real draw to the story. No one really cares about Kirishima Eijirou, rhythm guitarist and lyricist of Riot. Even the fame Riot is gaining from the relationship is just that, a new hype around the band rather than Kirishima himself. As though she senses his discomfort, Uraraka nudges Kirishima with her elbow and pitches her voice low. It's okay, she says conspiratorially. I'm happy you and Bakugo have found each other. You really like him, right? She says it as though it's a given. She's seen them kissing, and to her, they probably seem like a young couple, caught at the height of passion. And, as foolish as it is, Kirishima wouldn't call that a lie. At least, not on his end. I really do, he says, with quiet intensity. I really like... Oh. They've stopped a ways down the beach, everyone setting down umbrellas and towels and bags. Bakugo has wasted no time in shedding his shoes and stripping off his tank top. But he pauses when he feels Kirishima's eyes on him. You do a hell lot of staring, Bakugo says, voice sharp and satisfied. It's like he likes having Kirishima watch him. Kirishima swallows roughly, dragging his eyes from Bakugo's abs up to his face. Play it cool, he thinks. Act natural. I'm allowed to, aren't I? He says, then resists the urge to smack his hand against his forehead. What a stupid line. Bakugo scoffs, turning away. Whatever. We're racing out to the island. Are you coming or what? Kirishima blinks and looks around. Midoriya and Todoroki have also stripped down to their trunks. Midoriya stretching out his arms, and Todoroki waiting, with a static calm beside him. No one else? Kirishima asks, glancing around. Uraraka rolls her eyes. Bakugo just wants to race because Tsuyu-chan is in here to wipe the floor with him. It's best not to indulge him, Kirishima-kun. It's more trouble than it's worth, Sero says, laying out on the sand. It won't stop with the race, Kirishima. You're going to be proving how fast or strong you are for the rest of the day. Kirishima lets out a chuckle. That sounds pretty fun, actually. And let's get a fucking move on, Bakugo says, heading for the waves. His trunk sits low on his hips, revealing the shape of his hip bones. Kirishima sighs a little. Out of appreciation, probably. You're on. The island is really a collection of large rocks, some meters out from the beach. By the time he reaches it, Kirishima knows he's come fourth in the race. Bakugo and Todoroki had sped ahead almost immediately, and Kirishima had kept pace with Midoriya until the end. Now, he staggers onto the rock and sees Todoroki and Midoriya laying out against it. There hadn't been much space left, and Kirishima edges around Todoroki's head and tries to avoid stepping on anyone's outstretched arms. Bakugo is sitting on the edge of the rock, legs dangling into the water. There's no place for Kirishima here. Not just physically, but the three of them, they've known each other for so long. They became famous together, grew up into a world where everyone knows who they are. Even though Bakugo had yelled something about Midoriya only being allowed to come because he'd lose, there was still a natural rhythm to that. Why did Kirishima ever think that he could fit here? Oi, hair for brains! Bakugo snaps at him. What are you doing? He doesn't gesture overtly, but Kirishima follows his gaze to the stretch of rock left between him and Midoriya. Kirishima breaks into a grin as he sits between them, heaving a bit as he catches his breath. Who won? He asks, when his lungs stop burning. This candy cane fucker cheated, Bakugo growls, reaching out to shove Todoroki. Todoroki barely blinks as he edges out of Bakugo's reach. Instead of denying it, he rolls gracefully off the rock and into the water, causing a splash that drenches Bakugo from head to toe. Fucker! Bakugo repeats viciously, before diving into the water to engage in a water war. He chases after Todoroki in the water, sending up splashes like watery explosions. Next to Kirishima, Midoriya laughs. His dark green hair is flattened by the water, making his eyes look even larger. Kirishima chuckles himself. Are they always like that? Midoriya rolls over to face Kirishima. Not always. Kirishima's been a lot happier than usual lately. I think Todoroki finds him easier to deal with when he's not upset about something. Kirishima wonders if this is what Bakugo is like when he's happy. It must show on his face, because Midoriya cocks his head to one side and gives Kirishima an assessing look. You probably already know this, because you and Kachan are dating, but it's hard to get how he actually feels out of him. After this morning, I thought he was mad at me, but right now it feels like it used to when we were kids. Something about his tone makes Kirishima think that he's not talking about being a 15-year-old and being on the set of UA. How long have you guys known each other? Midoriya rolls up to sitting position, legs crossed as he holds on to his ankles. Forever, really. We grew up in the same neighborhood. I know what I'm talking about when I say Kachan is happy right now. Kirishima looks out at Bakugo, still splashing around in the ocean as Todoroki stays just beyond his reach. Bakugo's eyebrows are narrowed dangerously, cutting a sharp line into his face. But he's smiling. There's a fierce glint in his eye, and the bright sun shines off the white of his teeth. It's unfair how beautiful he looks in that moment. It reminds Kirishima of the barely contained sensuality of the Best Genus billboard, or the brooding depth of emotions that Nobuhiko showed on UA. Everything Bakugo does, he does with a complete commitment and deep intensity. He's really talented, isn't he? Kirishima mumbles, idle thoughts escaping him. Midoriya puffs up with something like pride. Kachan's the most talented person I know, he says honestly. Definitely the best actor I've ever met, even though he can be kind of a jerk about it. But there's no denying it. Of course, Kirishima has always known that. Bakugo is an unfairly talented actor. He's so very, very good at what he does. And right now, he's playing out a role in his real life. He's worried about Midoriya finding out the truth, so he's acting the part with perfect subtlety. Kirishima knew all this, has always known it. So why does it hurt to remember it now? They let the sun dry the water off their backs, until Bakugo demands another race back to shore. It's harder to tell the standings when they all stumble onto the beach, exhausted. Can we take a break now? Todoroki asks, voice barely inflected. Fine, Bakugo concedes. But after lunch we're deciding a champion once and for all. Kirishima, we better fucking win. We, like him and Bakugo, are a team, in this together. Kirishima doesn't know when Midoriya and Todoroki became their enemies, but that's hardly important. Duh, he says, wringing the water out of his ponytail. We'll be the ultimate champions. While they've been gone, the others have laid out a picnic lunch. Bentos are stacked onto one blanket, which is laid out in a patchwork with several others to make room for everyone to sit. Sero is manning a cooler, handing out sodas and beer. Kirishima takes a can gracefully, sipping on his drink as he takes a seat. Kirishima sits next to Bakugo with his lunch, with Ashido on the other side. Chiro and Yaoyozuru are next to Ashido, everyone else arranged in smaller groups. Kirishima doesn't expect Ida to grab his bento and come sit beside him and Bakugo. Hello again, Kirishima-kun, he says, sitting with a strange sort of formality. Bakugo shoots him a glare, but otherwise ignores him in favor of methodologically shoving rice into his mouth. Yo, Kirishima says, you have fun on land? Of course, Ida says with a smile. But besides that, I wanted to thank you. What for? Kirishima's met Ida before today. He doesn't know what the guy would have to thank him for. Ida cast a significant look in Bakugo's direction. I believe we can credit you on making this a complete reunion, he says. Midoriya-kun and Hiraku-kun might not say so, but this means a lot to them, and so we are grateful to you. Gratitude is an uncomfortable burden, especially when unearned. Kirishima smiles in a strange way, under the weight of Ida's matter-of-fact thanks. I didn't do anything, he tries to protest. Bakugo lets out an irritated huff. I won't be here if you want. And maybe that is the truth. Kirishima had asked Bakugo, over and over, if he'd consider going. And part of that was Kirishima's selfishness. He wanted to go, to spend time with Uraraka who had invited him so kindly, to get to know these people who shone like bright lights in a cityscape. And he'd also been meddling, wanting Bakugo to reconcile with his friends because Kirishima thought that would be best for all of them. Ida tilts his head to one side, considering the space between Kirishima and Bakugo, and nodding to himself. Just as I thought. Anyone who Bakugo would start a relationship with would surely be a very special person. Not really, Kirishima says. I'm just a normal guy. Bakugo rolls his eyes, and stabs at his lunch more viciously than is strictly necessary. In any case, Ida says, I believe you're a good influence. Has Bakugo spoken to you about the movie he's been offered? Not exactly, Kirishima almost says. But around a bite of his lunch, he recalls. The one that Midoriya's gonna be in? He casts a worried glance in Bakugo's direction, but he doesn't react. Ida nods again. Actually, Uraraka-kun, Midoriya-kun, and Todoroki-kun are all signed on. I represent all three of them, and the director and producers agree that if Bakugo-kun were in the movie as well, the entire value of the production would skyrocket. Kirishima can just imagine. The 4 UA alum haven't worked together since the show wrapped. Todoroki and Bakugo were both in Ground Zero, and Uraraka and Midoriya have done a project or two together. But this would be a true reunion. Midoriya has gotten up from his side of the picnic, going around the group with a bag of popsicles and single-serve ice cream. But when he gets to Ida, Bakugo, and Kirishima, he pauses. He passes Ida an ice cream, then bites down on his lower lip like he's mulling something over. "You know, Kachan," he says softly, "it's not for any of the press stuff that All Might wants you on this one." Now, Bakugo does react. His eyes flick up to Midoriya's, and he sneers. "You still call him that? Grow up, Deku." Red rises in Midoriya's cheeks, but he looks indignant rather than embarrassed. "That's not the point." Bakugo reaches out and grabs the bag of desserts from Midoriya, rifling through until he finds something he wants. He throws the bag back in Midoriya's face. "If Yagi wants me on a stupid movie, he can ask me himself." It's when Bakugo says the name that Kirishima finally makes the connection. Yagi Toshinori, the highest paid actor in history, star of the multiple installment All Might series of superhero films. He had retired after a long-term illness had taken him out of the game for several years. He had resurfaced just a few years ago, returning not to acting but directing. And Midoriya has had considerable roles in his last 2 movies, both of which were runaway successes. "Holy shit," Kirishima says. "Yagi Toshinori wants you in his movie? That's amazing." Bakugo scowls at him. "It's not that goddamn special." Midoriya frowns like he's about to take issue with that. "You say that like you know for sure. I'm not even a film guy, and I know that Yagi is like next level." He forgets that he's supposed to be acting the supporting boyfriend. He thinks about watching a movie with UA's complete main cast, directed by a legend. He couldn't have dreamed up anything better. "Because I do," Bakugo growls, biting into his popsicle. "Kachan was in the 7th All Might movie," Midoriya puts in helpfully. "It was his first role when we were 4 years old. They used to bring it up sometimes, when we did interviews for UA." That rings a bell, albeit vaguely. Kirishima had paid attention to those interviews, but had taken it as a given that UA was Bakugo's breakout role. Now he wonders, with a strange sort of fascination, what Bakugo was like as a 4-year-old actor. From a few feet away, the picnic erupts with noise. Kaminari is sitting cross-legged on the blanket, surrounded by Jiro, Ashido, and Sero. Sero is leaning over Kaminari's shoulder to point out something on the screen that they're all glued to. "No way!" Kaminari shrieks. "He's so cute!" Bakugo's head whips to its side, eyes roaming over Kaminari and the others before they come to rest on Sero. "Soy sauce, you better not have..." Sero looks up and smiles guiltily. Too late. "Kirishima!" Ashido calls out. "Come look at this!" She waves the phone at him. Kirishima goes, even though Bakugo makes a strangled sound of protest. Ashido holds out the phone to him, in which an old movie trailer is playing on loop. Most of it is action shots and explosions. Yagi Toshinori in his prime, golden hair and bulging muscles and an unfallible smile. But then, amongst the clips of Yagi's character All Might punching his way through walls, is a small boy. He's being grabbed by a shadowed figure, crying as he's ripped out of All Might's arms. When the title card comes up, it ends on a scene of the boy reaching out for All Might's hand. It's Bakugo, his features unmistakable even without his trademark scowl. His pale blonde hair is like a dandelion fluff, his expression open and genuine and heart-wrenching. Kaminari is barely holding back his laughter. I can't believe it, he wheezes. He's so grumpy all the time, but look at him. He's like a little angel. What the hell? The others are covering their faces in their hands, smothering their laughter and cooing over images of Bakugo as a small child. Behind him, Kirishima hears another strangled noise as Bakugo steps up and wrenches the phone out of his grip. Shut the fuck up, he seethes, holding the phone in a painfully tight grip. Are they making fun of Kachan? Midoriya asks, in the world's least subtle whisper to Ida. Ida nudges his glasses up his nose and nods. It would appear so. We're not saying anything bad, Ashido says to Bakugo. You were cute, and Kirishima definitely needs to see this, as your boyfriend. Bakugo squeezes the phone so hard that they all hear a crack. Dude, Kaminari says. That's my phone! Bakugo chucks it back at him and then stalks away. He wrenches up one of the free blankets and makes his way up the beach, away from the rest of the group. Huh, Midoriya says, like he can't quite process what he's just witnessed. Kirishima jogs up the beach to join Bakugo. He's laid out the blanket and is now sitting up on it, knees against his chest as he stares out at the ocean. Nudge over, Kirishima says, coming to sit beside him. If you say anything, Bakugo starts, but Kirishima cuts him off. What? I'm gonna make fun of you for being a professional actor while the rest of us were still in a playpen? He laughs at how ludicrous the thought is. You know, I'd known you were pretty cool for a while, but I had no idea you were so young when you got started. The scowl is etched across Bakugo's face like carvings into stone. We're not fucking talking about this. Kirishima doesn't bother pointing out that Bakugo has not made good on that statement in the past. Instead, he sits cross-legged on the blanket with Bakugo, watching the gentle ebb and flow of the waves against the sand. Bakugo doesn't say anything for several long minutes, but he doesn't tell Kirishima to leave, even as he leans back to lie down against the sand. The sunlight catches on his pale hair, making it stand out a stark gold, almost like Yagi Toshinori's. Kirishima doesn't know how long he sits there watching Bakugo, but it's long enough to notice when the tension eases out of his limbs, when his eyes flutter closed as he falls asleep. The sun is warm against Kirishima's face, and he thinks Bakugo has the right idea of it. The blanket is big enough for both of them, so Kirishima lies back and lets the rhythm of the waves lull him. He's half asleep already, and Bakugo lets out an incoherent mumble and rolls over, closing the last bit of distance between them. They're both still bare-chested from their swim, salt and sand dried up against their skin. But even so, it's natural and comfortable to drape an arm across Bakugo's chest, to let his hand rest against the nape of Bakugo's neck. Kirishima can feel his breath against his cheek, imagines his heart beating in time to the waves.